Yeah.
Hey, Freddie, I've just turned off screen sharing in case the individual came back. But I've just re-enabled it. So can you share your screen?
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, so just a little bit of housekeeping really quick. I'll have some signs, so just keep an eye out for the signs. There'll be timers. Just give me a little bit of like a thumbs up or a head nod or something, just to let me know you've seen them.
Yep, of course.
And other than that, we're pretty much ready to go. So next up, we've got Freddie Horler, who's a psychology undergraduate student here at Newcastle. Going to talk, I believe, about your dissertation, which is how consciousness influences stress appraisals and sporting performance. So whenever you're ready, Freddie, over to you.
Perfect. Thank you, Max. So as Max said, my name's Freddie Horler, and today I'm going to be speaking to you about my research project and how conscientiousness influences stress appraisals and sporting performance. So the idea behind the study stemmed from my personal interest in how one's personality can affect the way in which the same stimulus can be interpreted and thus affect their actions. As such, we look at the 5-factor model developed by McRae and Costa, which is one of the most widely applied frameworks for understanding personality. Every individual has a trait score for each of the 5 traits as seen on screen: neuroticism, openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, and agreeableness. And these are what make up individual personality. How these individual personality traits relate to stress is unclear, as the majority of research has found significant results. And so in this study, I'll focus on just a singular trait. I was interested in conscientiousness because not only has it had significant relationships with academic and job performance, but it has also had the least research focus, especially when compared to neuroticism in a sporting context. Mack et al. Showed that more conscientious people are more motivated behaviourally due to more challenge appraisals. Follow-up research gave context to this, as the individuals were classed as mentally stronger because of a greater coping ability coming from more challenge appraisals. But what are these appraisals? Well, appraisals are mechanisms in which individuals can understand the characteristics of the environment in front of them and react according to their concerns. As Lazarus noted, they are highly dependent on personality as they create differences in behaviour. He stated that if one's coping ability outweighed the perceived demands, it would be a challenge appraisal, but if the demands outweighed the coping ability, it would be a threat appraisal. Yet again, neuroticism is the most researched personality trait, and so I sought to make this study novel and fill a gap in the research. Hence, my first hypothesis was that there would be a linear relationship between conscientiousness and pre-stressor appraisal. The prediction is that the more conscientious a person is, the greater their threat appraisals. The second hypothesis looked at the moderation relationship, with a prediction that as performance of a high conscientious individual gets worse, post-stressor threat appraisals will increase. So how did the study run? Firstly, I recruited participants through administrative contacts at 25 golf clubs, asking for participants in their competitions. And then from there, used snowball sampling from these participants. The descriptive data from the 35 complete participants is on screen. 34 of these participants were male, with 1 choosing not to share their gender. This study used a causal comparative design where the independent variable was trait conscientiousness, the dependent variable was appraisal difference pre and post competition, and the interaction variable was sporting performance. The study used 2 questionnaires, pre and post competition, or before and after. The pre-competition questionnaire collected demographic information and gave information to participants to allow them to give informed consent. Crucially, it firstly collected the score for trait conscientiousness using facet C of the IPIICP23 120. Secondly, for appraisals, it used the CAT Sport scale, a single scale to measure challenge threat appraisals. However, following preliminary correlations, it was split apart into its component challenge and threat appraisals. After their individual competition, appraisals were remeasured with an adaptation of the CAT Sport scale. Objective performance was measured comparing their score to their handicap, and subjective performance was measured through a simple self-rating question. As alluded to before, my preliminary correlations showed that I needed to separate the appraisals into pre and post challenge and pre and post threat appraisals, rather than test them on a single scale. I used a moderated hierarchical regression analysis to see if there was a significant amount of variance within the dependent variables explained by the independent variables, including an interaction term to test for moderation. However, the test was underpowered due to a lack of participant uptake, which I'll speak about later. From the Kolmogorov-Smirnov test, you can see that post-stress appraisal and subjective performance were significant at the 5% level. However, follow-up histograms showed a general bell curve shape indicating normality, although it was noted that this still may increase the chance of a type 2 error in the results later. My results came in 2 stages: correlations, then the moderated hierarchical regression analysis. The pre-stressor correlation showed that pre-stressor appraisal had significant relationships with challenge and threat, hence the ability to separate them. Post-stressor correlation showed a significant relationship between post-stressor appraisal and appraisal difference, as well as, unsurprisingly, subjective and objective performance being intertwined measures. However, across both sets of correlations, it should be noted that conscientiousness had no significant relationships. From the summaries of the moderated hierarchical regression analyses, we see that there were no significant relationships and there was lower variance in post-stressor challenge appraisals. However, the interaction term for post-stressor threat appraisals approached significance, and with its variance being at 16%, there is reasoning to look more in depth at this relationship in particular, with previous research showing significant results but only under 5% variability. As you can see from the simple slopes graph, there is a clear interaction when split by high and low conscientiousness. Both slopes independently are significant with the high conscientiousness group, having a clear increase in post-stressor threat appraisals after a poor performance, and the low conscientiousness group associated with greater threat appraisals after a good performance. This study aims to show that there was a relationship between conscientiousness, sporting performance, and challenge threat appraisals. I found that my first hypothesis was incorrect and that there was no significant relationship between trait conscientiousness and pre-stressor appraisal. The reasoning behind this was unclear, but potentially it seems that a more sport-specific scale for conscientiousness would create significant relationships and increase the validity of the scale. However, theorists may wish to test a wider range of participants in a stressful environment to conclusively test the original theory. The second hypothesis was proven partially true, with a significant relationship between conscientiousness, sporting performance, and only post-stressor threat appraisals. Simple slopes interaction graph showed the high conscientiousness group to increase in threat appraisals after a poor performance. What is unclear to me is why the low conscientiousness group decreased in threat appraisals after a poor performance. This feels counterintuitive and could be down to a peculiarity of golf, as each poor performance will increase their handicap. However, this is unlikely to be in the individual's immediate thought process post-competition. Instead, it points to a weakness in my methodology with too few participants, and so an anomalous result would shift the results greatly. Alongside these findings, it is worth reanalyzing why conscientiousness had no significant relationships until split apart in the simple slopes interaction graph. It may show that another factor is involved in the relationship between conscientiousness and how challenging something is appraised, such as preparedness. There were two key limitations throughout my study. As mentioned before, the lack of participant uptake led to an underpowered test. The nature of UK golf being a fair weather sport led to both the reduced numbers, but crucially, less important competitions being in the winter, so participants felt less stressed when playing these competitions. Secondly, daily conditions will have affected both performance measures, as the handicap measure does not change based on whether the course conditions will either be easier or harder, changing the objective measure considerably. So in conclusion, this study found that conscientiousness moderated the effect that objective performance had on post-stressor appraisals. However, the correlation showed conscientiousness to be non-significant with the other variables, showing clear ground to improve this study through testing in summer, and thus at bigger and more important competitions. And so creating a sport-specific conscientiousness scale to increase the overall validity of the test is highly recommended. Future research should look to expand upon this study through shifting the general focus away from just objective performance and onto subjective performance, as work done by Tamaka and Majok showed a relationship between conscientiousness and subjective performance, and thus this test would be more conclusive in how it works. Thank you very much for listening. My references will be coming up.
Excellent, absolutely spot on the money there as well, Freddie. Fantastic talk. Any questions? Maybe one question from the floor, if anyone's got one. So Freddie, if I was a coach and I was asking for maybe one key take home that I could take from your talk and apply to my practice, what would it be?
So I'd be looking at trying to work closely, speak a lot with your individuals, because often it can be case by case with it, and especially if they're high conscientiousness, a poor performance will affect them massively. So I'd be looking at treating them and making sure they feel like that even if they've performed badly, they feel like they've got something to improve on, and look at trying to move everything into goal focused challenge appraisal. So have all your targets as goal focused rather than have anything as threat, because if you can shift everything away from threat appraisals, performance generally does increase.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Freddie. It's a fantastic talk. So next up we have Ailish. Is Ailish there?
Yeah.
If I could ask you to stop sharing your screen, Freddie. Freddie, are you there? Stop sharing your screen. Perfect, thank you. And Ailish, if you could share your screen. Perfect. So just a really brief little bit of housekeeping. I've got some signs, so just keep an eye out for the signs. Give me like a thing, you know, like a thumbs up or something like that, just to let me know you can see them. There's a 2-minute sign and then a time's up sign. On a time's up sign, just try and wrap up the point that you're on, generally speaking, if we get to there. Okay, so fantastic. Our next